Hello, marriage champions. I'm Amy Morgan, the feature writer for the San Antonio Marriage Initiative. I am so delighted to introduce Lauren Reitsema to you today. Lauren is the Vice President of Strategy and Communications at the Center for Relationship Education located in Denver. Lauren spent the past 15 years teaching relationship skills to youth, adults, and corporate teams. But today, she's going to share a more personal story with us: how her parents' divorce when she was a teenager affected her in the same way it affects millions of other children of divorce. Lauren wrote In Their Shoes, helping parents better understand and connect with children of divorce, to give a voice to the children and help others engage in a more informed and helpful way. Lauren, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, I've been really looking forward to this. I know I've heard you speak before, but could you tell us a little bit of your story?
Certainly, yes. I am an adult child of divorce who's trying to break a legacy in my current marriage and make sure that a family pattern that I saw from, I would say, generations of grandparents and aunts and uncles, maybe even into the cousin family tree, experience separation. And I'm passionate about teaching relationship skills so that we can be preventative and not reactive to maybe what we could have done differently looking at the past, but what we can do in the present to change a legacy of marriage health.
Well, and that kind of started, with you and your story and your experience, which really led you even to study. I'm going to just give a little plug for both of our alma maters, TCU. To study communication. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? And then
sure, yeah. So the timeline of my family's experience was I actually was almost getting my driver's license maybe a little bit later when my parents filed for divorce, and then left for college just a short couple of years later. And as many people leave for school, their biggest question is, what am I going to do? What am I going to study? What's my job going to be? And I felt like because of my family situation, my biggest question is, how am I going to change this? And so I kind of stumbled into an interpersonal communications class my freshman year, just not really even knowing that communications was something you could study. And I was fascinated by what the professors were saying about patterns and research and evidence of how you show up in relationships. And so I realized in that moment that this wasn't just a academic pursuit for me, but potentially a personal pursuit to learn skills to better my life in relationships, and not only in my marriage future at that point, but in my friendships and family. And so I feel very fortunate that my own kind of story of hurt and confusion about what might have happened in my family's relationships actually led me to both an academic study of and a vocational practice of studying relational wellness and health.
Well, and that led you kind of through a catharsis to write this book, to really give a voice to what it feels like to be on the kid side.
Yeah. So, I found that a lot of the resources I was getting, and they were great resources in counseling or in different books or studies, were all written from the adult perspective. Great psychology, wonderful counseling tips. And I remember being with my counselor as kind of an early adolescent and saying, "Man, have your parents ever been divorced?" And she looked right at me and said, "No, they haven't, but I know all of this stuff from what I've studied." And I just kind of felt like, let me share my perspective. And that kind of started something as a kid that I think expanded as an adult when I became old enough to give voice to something I really didn't have the words for when I was in the middle of it. And just really cool opportunities came my way where I was realizing, as I was speaking about this issue from a child's perspective, that it was really hitting a nerve. And a lot of people had follow-up questions, and I had lines of people wanting to talk to me after a seminar that I was doing. And so I really just followed that trajectory and found an opportunity toward writing that I seized and am thankful, to be a voice in. But truly it was, I call it almost a circumstantial, I wouldn't say accident, but just one of those right place at the right time kind of things where children of divorce really don't have a voice, because I would say we might be from the first generation where it's more prolific than what came before us.
Well, and a lot of people who will be watching this with us are people that, are marriage champions. They may be in, mentors in their church. They may be church staff. They may just be somebody interested with a heart for marriage. How do you think your book could be helpful for them? What application do you see?
That's a really good question. Well, first of all, thanks for championing marriage. That's amazing. And we need a marriage champion on every street corner. So I appreciate if you're listening and that's your role. I just want to start with gratitude, because I think marriage is often overlooked as an area of study. So thank you for that. I would say it probably would be most resourceful for just understanding a journey of empathy. I think so often the people that find this book helpful are in the step parent or the bio parent role and trying to figure out, why are my kids acting the way that they're acting? Why are they treating me the way they're treating me? How and what did children of divorce go through? What are they experiencing? Because so often it's hidden or it's masked by sports or performance or retreating to friends' houses. And so I think it really will just give a window of exploration from a child's perspective, and help connect the dots of, oh, this might be what people are going through. And that was my hope in writing it, is just to say, maybe see this from a different angle, and then you'll have more resources and data to know how to move forward.
I know that someone that spoke to me who was a marriage champion said that it was something that she planned to introduce when she and her husband were counseling couples who were having, marital difficulty, to really say, look, if you think that you really want a divorce, look at this book, because this is going to be your child's reality. And so that I really see an application there, because some parents may not even know. I know we talked about that a little bit, that you thought that maybe it would even inspire somebody to give their marriage another hard look before they decided to call it quits.
Oh man, I love that prevention lens, because I think so often when you're in the heart of discord in a relationship and you feel like you just can't take it anymore, you lose that long-term focus. And I think it would be really powerful as a tool to maybe foreshadow what their kids might experience. But also thanks for bringing that perspective, because I think it's a both and. It's whether you're currently blending a family and trying to figure out patterns of present, or potentially contemplating what future could look like. I think that's a really great angle to take when approaching this resource.
Well, you know what, too? Our neighborhoods, our pews, our communities are full of blended families. And to be able to understand and really feel because there are some simple things that and I'd like to get into the meat of the book if we could, but there's some really simple, just a little tweak where you wouldn't think that that's what a child, there were some things that really struck me, and I might remind you, or maybe you'll bring them up, but that really you wouldn't know, and are very helpful to know.
That's helpful for me, because I felt like taking as a risk and speaking from that firsthand experience was, when you said cathartic earlier, it really was an emotional experience, because to be authentic, I had to re-enter a life stage of that woundedness and that present. But in that life stage, I didn't have the words. And so I think one of the things that comes out of that in my own family experience, my mom in particular shared with me, man, if I had this resource from you when you were going through it, I would have done so many things differently, just because I would have known. And I said, well, that's why we can give this as a gift to the next generation, because I couldn't have written it down when I was in the midst of it. So I'm thankful.
Well, and you have a very close relationship with your mom. So
I do. Yes, we actually work together. She's my biggest fan and great champion of pioneering relational wellness nationally.
So let's dive into the book a little bit. Some of the things, I know I took tons and tons of notes when I read it, and I was going to show it, but I've already passed it on to be used by someone else. So someone can benefit. But I know, like you talked about the stages of grief. When you gave your talk, you kind of had used the SMILE acronym, and I thought that really was a nice way to unpack it.
Yes, I remember at the workshop that you attended, I it was the first time I had put that acronym together with a dental analogy. And I was so tickled by everybody's curiosity. Say, how in the world are you going to tie dental work and smiles to divorce? But I really do. The reason I went with the SMILE acronym in that particular speaking engagement was because we hide a lot of the pain behind a smile. And so the grief, that stages of grief, is the first acronym letter, that S, because we have to remember that whatever stage of process a child is in post-divorce and whatever age that child is in, grief is a part of the journey for everyone. Whether it's a short season or a long season is determined by a context of, factors that not everybody can universalize. But I would say that grief has to be spoken of, because divorce is a loss and it's a trauma and it's a wound. And if we don't start there, we can't fully heal.
Well, I know that's one of the big myths in our world. The children are resilient; they'll be fine. They're okay. Don't just get on with it. That to allow the divorce to be called a loss, even just that word. It's okay for the child to call it a loss, and to understand for the child it is a loss.
Right. I would say even in the announcement for, hey, divorce is happening, or we're splitting up, we're separating, it's appropriate and it's probably necessary for kids to know it's going to be okay. And we still love you and it's not your fault. But sometimes the energy, at least from what I experienced, was so compelling toward, this is the best thing for our family and we're all going to be great. And it's almost as if I think of when my kid scrapes, his or her knee, and you just want to be like, okay, get back on the bike. You don't want to pay attention to the bleeding, because that's when they lose their minds. And I think, in a scraped knee, that's kind of what you have to do to get over that and get their mind on something different. But for a divorce, that's a life altering event. That's a milestone that changes everything. And so to rush through that and say, it's going to be okay. You guys you're resilient. We'll pick up and do this together. It actually can stop the healing process before it starts, because you don't even get to look down and see that you're hurting. And so I think it's, overindulged in the positive optimism at the very beginning sometimes, which I love optimism and I want to point kids toward health and healing. But I think we're remiss to not let them cope and sit in the loss and cry together and just hold each other and say, this is really hard and none of us want this, but it is the healthiest path forward.
I know you specifically said children, or at least I read it this way, that children are told to get over it, but I'm going to give you the skills to get through it. Just that little tweak, but using those words is so much more empowering.
Yes, we say we want to get over things, we want to get around things, we want to avoid things. And I think you can't really fully experience the journey without going through it, facing it head on. And that's another reason I wanted to write this piece, is because I want people to stop stigmatizing some of the hard and allow themselves to get through it in a really productive and reconciled way.
Yeah, with skills, which is what your
tools. Yes, skills and tools.
Yeah, which is what you've dedicated your whole career to, is developing tools and teaching people how to use them. So let's get back to the M, the memory loss. I thought that was really interesting. My husband's family, they divorced, and what you were talking about, you talked about the pictures, the family pictures.
Yeah.
Can you tell that story for those who weren't there about family pictures?
Certainly. So the one thing I capture a lot is the art of storytelling often lives in flipping through visual images, whether that's a painting over a mantelpiece and a fire, or a photo album that you're sitting with grandparents and talking about, when you were this age, do you remember this is when we went to Florida together, or that's when you caught your first fish. And I've come to learn that the brain actually processes memory through those visual stimuli that come through oftentimes pictures and images. And in my experience with divorce, as soon as our family structure changed, we hid away all of those family albums and didn't know what to do with all the beautiful portraits that we'd taken over the years and hung on the walls of our homes. And with the hiding of those visual storytelling books and images, I actually lost memories. I can't remember parts of my childhood and my life that used to be refreshed by this image of gathering as a family, because there was shame attached to looking at the previous when we were trying to honor our current blended structure and the new pictures that hung. And so I talk about the M with losing not only the freedom to reminisce without hurting anyone's feelings, but also losing the physical memories that you depended on those images to jog your memory.
And then you talked about identity crisis, and you used that great analogy about your sporting team.
Yeah, the one with two jerseys. Yes,
I have been there. In fact,
the particular image in the book was a 5A state championship. And I know that if you're listening to this in San Antonio, you know what that means. It's big time football when you're Friday night lights and everyone's got rivalries. And when I was in high school, my high school played Columbine, and we were in the state championship, and it was the year after that horrible fatal tragedy with the violence that was happening among my peers. And I was so torn because I didn't want to root against Columbine. I wanted to root for them because they needed a victory. But I also was a member of this high school that had a chance to win the state championship. All the players and the crew that had worked so hard. And so I felt torn. I didn't know which side to be on. And it was the first time, as somebody who's competitive and knows who I'm loyal to, that I felt like there's no win here. Yeah. And for me, that's the closest I've been able to describe how I felt with my family, because I'm on both sides. I want my dad to be happy. I want my mom to be happy. And I want all of their new life to gel, but I don't know where to fit in that. And I don't know who to cheer for, because there really doesn't feel like there's an honest way to cheer for both. And so that's a struggle I know I went through personally, and I imagine many other kiddos do as well.
Yeah, you talk about that for both, parents. They get to make a fresh start. They get to move on. They get to have more kids or have a new spouse, and they can look forward. But for the kids, you guys are always stuck. It's always your reality.
Yes.
You don't get to move forward.
Past. It's not a past that happened in the past. It's a present and a future trajectory that just. You can't duplicate yourself. It's an impossibility. It's hard enough to do that in one setting when you're trying to retell a story. It's that authenticity from that first timer experience just is really challenging to translate to two sides of family and two sides of an experience.
Well, and that's one thing you described in the lingering effects part, that would be your L. But you talked about, people, they maybe think like right here in the here and now, this is, my life is in crisis. I'm not happy. Divorce is where I'm going. But they don't realize then, 10 years later, 20 years later, now you're having weddings. Now you're having babies being born, grandchildren. Now you're having, where I'm dealing with, elderly parents.
Yes.
If elderly parents are not married, that leads to a whole nother responsibility with the adult children.
Right. Who takes care of them physically? Who takes care of the finances? Who shows up for them at the assisted living center or in nursing care? Because they're all of those long-term, slow-moving seasonal processes that typically happen in a nuclear setting are lingering with you into the future, long and after divorce. And that sometimes for me, this chapter was really interesting and captivating for me to experience, because I didn't even see them coming. These are memories that I talked about thinking, oh my gosh, that stung a little bit. And I don't even know why, because I'm healthy and happy and whole, but I had to acknowledge what I was feeling. And so the word lingering effects, I had this epiphany moment where this is an effect of the divorce that is lingering into my adult life that I need to stop and deal with in this moment, because otherwise it'll catch up to me. And I've heard a lot of feedback from readers that have said that phrase and that experience is also really inspiring to them, because they too had these moments of reflection that just almost came out of nowhere. And they had to remember that this had something to do with long ago and not necessarily what was in their current reality.
Yeah, you mentioned even the birth of your first child, which should have been such a joy. Something hit you there.
Yeah, well, and granted, it was an absolute joy, and it was something that that I don't ever. It was more of a conversation about her entry, with her being labeled as a number. She was number 5 in the blended grandchild scenario. She was the 5th grandchild coming into our blended family, but she was the first baby in my bio family. Of my siblings, I was the first to have a baby. And so I felt like I had lost that first time experience of being a new mom, because my blended family experience had already had that ahead of me. And so I called those stolen firsts in the book, is what I refer to.
Well, that for some reason that particular scenario, and that, again, that's something that most people would never think about. But if maybe, if it's your spouse that comes from a divorced family, or it's your neighbor, your best friend, or whatever, if you've never heard that said, you have no idea. I mean, and then again, like it's always, as we said, you've got the wedding, there's all sorts of things that can cause emotional pain and that are lingering effects. And it's helpful to know, because knowing you and how well spoken and beautiful you are, I'm sure you did not have a little temper tantrum at that time, but maybe not everybody would be able to handle things so graciously. And then you have a big blowout, and then you have a communication problem and a rift in the family. And so just to know some of these things, really, again, it's preventive.
Well, and don't give me too much credit, because some of my reactions were really raw, and if I could have a do-over, I would have wanted to do them more graciously. But I think a lot of them also happened in kind of your private thoughts and so it also brings out loneliness, because you feel like I can't share this emotion publicly because it shows that I'm not over the divorce, right? That I'm not, I haven't reconciled it, and I need to just get on with the show. But what's really happening is, wait, I need somebody to process this with, and I surely can't be the only one who's felt this. And that's been the most affirming part of engaging with readers as they've reached out to me, is to be able to say, me too, you're not alone. And so it's been affirming and validating, because there was some risk in sharing stories that I hadn't really sussed out in the public square to see if it was just me, and I'm realizing more and more that this is a pattern that happens to a lot of people behind closed doors. And if we can bring light to it and we can expose it, it's more healing and freeing than it is pain inducing and frustrating. And even my own stepdad in that particular story was so kind when he said, I had no intention of hurting your heart. I just didn't know. And I always laugh with him and say, neither did I, but now that I do, let's maybe bring this forward so other people can be one step ahead of our journey.
Yeah. Well, and again, that's such a great application for those watching, so they could read this and then just be more aware of, there's a lot of people in our lives that are feeling this way, whether it's ourselves, whether it's our own kids and our own blended family, whether it's somebody we're working with in a marriage, there's a lot of application for this. I know you told another story that I thought was really interesting from the perspective of a child feeling like, we were kind of kidding at me saying, of course you've handled it graciously, because feeling like as a child, you had to handle everything graciously.
Yeah.
That, if you, for being called to that higher standard as the child, to be the one to be
that was I still feel the emotional exhaustion of keeping my brave face on and making sure that I used my manners and I was polite, and I didn't have, because the core of the intent of a child's heart is rarely malicious. They're not trying to rip a new family member apart or to try and be mean. It's really, imagine the face that you put on in a public persona before, you're going on a speaking engagement, or you're going to talk to somebody at a church, or do something with a small group, and you're giving them your best practices. That's probably not the environment that you'd walk in and just begin crying over an emotional experience you had on the phone with, your partner before you walk into the event. But in a safe space with people, your people that you're known, and you're going to walk in and be like, oh man, does my mascara look okay? Am I put together? I just had a really hard call, but I'm going to put myself together. And you kind of have the energy spurts to get through those composure situations. But with a step parent or a new person in your life, you don't know these people yet. They're brand new to you. And it takes years to develop that intimacy and that safety to, walk through the kitchen with your robe on. I remember the first time I walked, down the hallway in my pajamas with my stepdad around, because it was like, who are you? You're not. But with my dad, I did that since I was a little girl. There's nothing inappropriate so it's really hard to have a safe emotional space to process when there are these new people on stage and you're trying to figure out, okay, I can't let them see my raw face, because how are they going to react? Is it going to hurt them? Am I going to get in trouble? All of those emotions are really, really hard to manage.
Yeah, which I think is a revelation, because people probably don't know that at all.
No.
No. And then the last, and we kind of talked about this, we're coming full circle. We kind of talked about this at the beginning. You were talking about the evaluating marriage, and that's what you went through, thinking, oh gosh, what's my legacy? Can I navigate this successfully?
Yes. I mean, I felt like I always wanted to have a healthy perspective, and I really do. Marriage is so great, and I am a huge champion for marriage, and I continue to speak with the platforms that I've given that marriage is not the problem. It's just the behaviors and the patterns of the people who choose to be married that can sometimes cause the conflict. But the misnomer, the myth, is that everything was fine until I got married, right? Everything was fine until we were 10 years in, and then the honeymoon stage wore off, and you just were more annoying than charming. And that's when all of the pretense falls, and you really have to figure out, am I in this for the long haul? Is this the right match? Can we work on this? And I started to get really fearful as I hit my mid to late 20s, when I was in a serious relationship that I wanted to become marriage. But I realized I had a healthy childhood. My parents were married for almost 20 years, and they were not toxic toward each other, at least not from what I saw. So can I do this? Is this going to happen to me passively? And psychologists call that the sleeper effect. And I was really encouraged to learn and determine that no, it's not just going to happen to you through genetics, but having a mindset of not wanting it to happen is not enough. You need to be resourced. You need to have skills. You need to have tools. You need to learn how to do relationships and practice them. And so I think full circle, it's really inspiring to see that you can prepare for marriage differently than your divorce generation did. But you can't just assume that your chemistry or your grit is going to, outdo them, because everyone wants to do marriage well. I haven't met one couple who says, I'm going to walk down the aisle and can't wait to be in divorce court with you. That doesn't happen. But when it gets there, our excuses are, well, you weren't the right person, or, we fell out of love, or circumstances changed. Well, yeah, but doesn't that happen to all of us if we're not nurturing our relationships with skills? Aren't our cars going to wear out if we're not taking them in for oil changes? And so I just can't be a bigger proponent of relational skill building and practice and intentionality and all the things it takes to get across that threshold with confidence, but also with tools, because you can't do it with grit. You need more than grit.
Well, and that is exactly takes us right back to where we started, because that's what you do is provide these tools, this book being one of them. So thank you so much, Lauren. It has been so great to talk to you. Our time just flew. So,
well, I really appreciate the opportunity, and I hope whatever was offered was helpful and encouraging. And I just, like I said, I feel thankful and grateful for this platform, and just want to use it to help and not to be an expert, because I'm in it with all of you, and we're all on a journey toward how to do life well.
Marriage champions, if you're looking to connect with Lauren, you can always find us at samarriage.org. Thank you again.
Thanks so much, everyone.